We only keep her around because it looks good for the charity photos, babe. Otherwise, she is just dead weight. Honestly, the smell of her old lavender sachets makes me nauseous. It smells like a nursing home. Those words drifted from the kitchen of the expansive, glass-walled penthouse in the Seaport district of Boston, slicing through the ambient jazz music like a serrated knife. I stood frozen in the dim hallway, holding a folder of structural archival documents I had spent weeks preparing for my son's new venture. The laughter that followed from Tyler and Madison solidified the brutal reality my decades of invisible sacrifice meant absolutely nothing to them. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. I did not drop the folder. I did not push open the glass doors to demand a pathetic explanation. Anger wasn't loud this time, it was clinical. I quietly set down the archival reports on the marble serving table, smoothed the crisp lines of my navy blue wool crepe dress, and walked out of that elite Boston penthouse. The cold Atlantic wind bit at my face as the heavy service elevator doors slipped shut, cutting off the jazz, the unearned champagne, and the profound theft of my devotion. Tyler and Madison had flown me out to their East Coast investment gala in Boston just to use me as a prop, but my return to my home archive in San Francisco was driven by absolute, cold precision. The windshield wipers beat a steady, methodical rhythm against the glass as I drove from the airport through the rainy streets, matching the absolute clarity taking shape in my mind. By 11:51 p.m., I was seated behind the heavy mahogany desk in my private home archive, surrounded by rows of leather-bound historical ledgers and the sharp, blue glow of my secure financial terminal. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a shred of maternal regret, but there was only balance sheet precision. I'd been the silent investor in their dynamic version of family for far too long. Now I realized my compassion had been an unearned luxury subscription, with me footing the bill for years. This wasn't a breakdown. It was an accounting. I opened the commercial credit management portal and extracted the master files for Tyler's investment firm. He believed his tech-driven venture capital firm was a monument to his lone genius, completely oblivious to the fact that the entire structure rested safely on my hidden validation. I located the active asset guarantee document, the $4,500,000 bridge financing covenant I had co-signed to secure their luxury real estate, when Tyler claimed his primary liquidity temporarily locked up in tech startup stocks. My fingers did not falter as I pulled up the immediate security revocation protocols. I simply invoked the asset protection clause, a hidden safety metric embedded deep within page 42 of the banking contract. They weren't shocked by what they had done, they were shocked that I had stopped playing along. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner, authorizing the formal request. The red laser sliced through the dim study, shifting the terminal indicator from active guarantee to pending lender liquidation notice. The system instantly generated an automated 30-day recall alert to their commercial lender. Next, I accessed our linked high-yield joint emergency reserve account. I didn't hesitate or pause to consider their upcoming deadlines. I initiated a total balance sweep, transferring every remaining cent into an isolated, single-signature trust under my exclusive corporate control. Finally, I opened the corporate credit line interface and pulled up Tyler's supplementary credit card. I selected his user profile and clicked the command to deactivate the line permanently, flagging the account for immediate review. Inside my quiet studio, the screen glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and methodical retribution. By 12:03 a.m., the financial architecture propping up their hollow world had been systematically dismantled. To understand the absolute justice of my account, you must look closely at the ledger of the past 20 years. Ever since my husband Marcus died, leaving me with a historic Victorian row house and a 12-year-old boy whose eyes were constantly clouded with fear, I had operated as a human shield against reality. I chose to insulate Tyler from the cold mechanics of poverty, treating my own body, time, and desires as secondary resources to be completely consumed for his advancement. I spent decades handling the toxic chemicals required for high-end document preservation, breathing in the fumes of acetone and ethanol under dim basement lights, transforming my physical health into tuition checks for his elite education at Stanford. A portion of the audience might look at my initial silence at the loft and mistake it for weakness. They might ask why a woman with my intellect and independence would simply turn around and walk away after being publicly trampled. But what they don't understand is the invisible chains of a survivor. As a structural archival conservator, I spent 40 years learning a fundamental truth. When you handle a crumbling, decaying manuscript, you never pull at the fractures. If you react with sudden emotional force, you shatter the remaining framework entirely. You must work in absolute clinical silence, patiently peeling back every layer of decay until you identify the master seam holding the corruption together. My silence at that duplex loft wasn't submission. It was a structural assessment. I didn't scream because I was busy analysing the exact coordinates of the foundation, calculating precisely where to pull the anchor so the entire unearned tower would cave under its own weight. I lived by that ledger of invisible care for decades. I vividly remember the winter of Tyler's sophomore year. He called me from his dorm, his voice tight with social anxiety, explaining that he couldn't participate in the elite venture capital networking club because his clothing didn't match the legacy students. That same afternoon, I cancelled my own medical evaluation for a chronic lung inflammation and took on a third archival cataloguing project. I wore a pair of worn leather boots with soles so thin I had to line them with discarded manuscript cardboard just to keep my feet off the frozen pavement. I transferred the $4,000 he needed within 48 hours, hiding the physical extraction from him completely. When he graduated, I cashed in my entire private life insurance policy to clear his debts and provide the foundational capital for his firm. I watched him step into the corporate arena with the unshakable arrogance of a man who believed he was entirely self-made, never acknowledging the woman who had systematically liquidated her own safety to build his pedestal. Madison entered his life and formalized the audit, tracking net worth instead of human character. They treated my continuous $4,000 monthly injections into the joint account as an automated utility, like electricity or running water, while privately mapping my presence as a nauseating, embarrassing relic of a simpler time. They truly believed my silence meant eternal compliance. They could not conceive that the exact devotion that built their unearned world possessed the precise, analytical ledger required to cleanly tear it down. The financial leverage did not break quietly. It began on a Tuesday morning with the sharp, rhythmic vibrations of my personal phone against the archive desk. The first wave was an automated message from the credit terminal, indicating that the supplementary credit card had been blocked during a corporate luncheon at a premium waterfront restaurant in the Marina District. Tyler was in the middle of pitching his fund's primary strategy to a new group of anchor investors. He loved using that card to project an unshakable illusion of massive personal wealth. Instead, he was forced to endure the absolute humiliation of having his transaction rejected in front of the exact people whose millions he desperately sought to manage. Then came the text from Madison. Her carefully curated public relations vocabulary completely dissolved into raw, venomous panic within minutes. The messages flooded my screen, a cascade of unhinged hostility. "You are an absolute monster, Laura. You are a bitter, psychotic old woman trying to destroy your own son's career because you cannot handle his success. You are mentally unstable. Reverse this immediately or we will ensure you spend the rest of your pathetic life dying completely alone in a state-run facility." By 2 p.m, Madison took her desperate strategy into the public square. She launched a heavily filtered video on her lifestyle channel, sitting under soft, studio lighting with rehearsed tears pooling in her eyes. She crafted an elaborate narrative of a cruel, senile mother-in-law who was maliciously trying to sabotage a young couple's marriage out of pure jealousy. The comment section quickly filled with generic condemnation from her superficial social circle, branding me as a toxic matriarch. I watched the video with a cold, unblinking detachment. They weren't shocked by the repulsive things they had said in that hallway. They were simply shocked that the wallet had developed a spine and stopped playing along. Finally, Tyler called. His voice was ragged, a volatile mix of gaslighting and panic that eliminated any remaining path to family reconciliation. "Mom, what the hell is wrong with you? You are completely overreacting to a private joke between a husband and wife. We were under immense corporate stress that night. Madison didn't mean it that way. She had a severe migraine and was just venting. You have created an unmitigated disaster for my investment firm. Call the bank right now, withdraw the security petition, and fix this mess before you ruin everything I've built." I sat in my armchair, watching the phone continue to light up in the quiet archive. Anger wasn't loud this time, it was factual. Tyler's defensive demands didn't hurt me, they freed me. They gave me the absolute moral clearance I needed to execute the next phase of the liquidation. He believed he was protecting his career, entirely unaware that a woman who spent 40 years archiving the rise and fall of absolute empires cannot be shamed by an internet smear campaign. I turned the device face down on the desk, stepped out of the messaging loop, and pulled out my legal folders. The emotional family drama was officially over. It was time for a clinical, professional audit. I did not waste another second engaging with their hysterical digital theatre. I left Madison's public smear campaign to spin into its own void and systematically blocked their numbers from my personal lines. This was no longer an emotional family dispute. It was a cold, necessary corporate liquidation. I picked up my briefcase, packed the complete transaction history, and drove downtown to the financial district. I had an appointment with Arthur, a senior asset protection attorney who had managed my family's private legal architecture for over 3 decades. Arthur was a man who operated entirely on cold logic and verifiable evidence, possessing a clinical disdain for emotional manipulation or unearned drama. His office sat high above the city, a clean, sharp space dominated by geometric floor-to-ceiling glass and steel panels that looked directly out over the grey expanse of the San Francisco Bay. It was the perfect environment for a clinical audit, an unblinking contrast to the chaotic, fraudulent performance my son was executing on the other side of the city. I laid the comprehensive financial dossier across his dark glass conference table. I presented the bank statements mapping the rapid, unapproved extraction of my funds, the verified transcripts of the text threats, and the original mortgage contract for the $6 million duplex loft. Arthur adjusted his glasses and reviewed the documentation in absolute silence. The only sound in the room was the crisp rustling of heavy paper and the methodical scratch of his fountain pen on a legal pad. I watched his eyes track the figures, treating the erosion of my life savings with the exact same clinical evaluation I used to analyze structural fractures in ancient, decaying manuscripts. When he reached page 42 of the mortgage covenant, his pen stopped. A thin, knowing smile touched his lips. They completely overlooked the material asset ceding clause, Laura, Arthur stated, his tone completely stripped of personal nuance. As the sole guarantor holding the primary capital liquidity, you possess the absolute right to declare a material breach of trust based on the primary borrower's hidden over-leverage. Tyler has extended his credit lines far beyond his actual corporate asset capability, just to fund their personal luxury lifestyle. He looked up, his gaze locking with mine with absolute legal clarity. If I initiate this formal petition to the commercial underwriters, the bank will immediately trigger the acceleration clause. They will be forced to produce the full $4,500,000 balance in full within 30 days. If they fail, the property enters immediate foreclosure. It is an absolute, irreversible corporate eviction. There is no legal path left for renegotiation. I looked out the window at the container ships drifting across the water, completely at peace with the gravity of the execution. "File the petition today, Arthur," I replied, my voice carrying the steady authority of a woman who had spent 40 years maintaining total order in the archives. The relationship was already terminated when they decided my life's work was nothing more than an open credit line to be consumed with contempt. Let the unearned foundation collapse. Arthur nodded, reached for his secure phone terminal, and contacted the primary underwriters. The war had officially transitioned from a messy domestic grievance into a clinical, professional liquidation. 18 days into the legal liquidation timeline, Arthur called me back to his corporate office. He did not offer his usual polite greetings. His expression was unusually grave as he gestured for me to sit, sliding a secondary, thick manila folder across the smooth, dark surface of his desk. Our deep forensic financial audit uncovered something that transcends standard family entitlement or personal manipulation, Laura, Arthur stated, his tone completely stripped of nuance. He leaned forward, adjusting a stack of financial ledgers to reveal the secondary flow of capital. When we demanded the complete transaction history of the joint account to map their spending patterns for the foreclosure defense, the underwriters flagged a secondary transfer structure. Your son didn't just drain your monthly $4,000 cash injections for luxury dinners, car leases, and spa appointments. He opened the file, displaying a series of scanned wire transfers totaling exactly $150,000. I looked down at the signature line on the authorization documents. It was my name, written in an elegant, scripted ink that at first glance looked perfectly authentic. But my eyes had spent 40 years analyzing the microscopic variations in historical manuscripts. I instantly caught the unnatural, rigid pixelation in the curvature of the letter L, the telltale mechanical limitation of a digital tracing program. They pulled this liquidity from your late husband's restricted family trust account 6 months ago, the attorney explained, his finger tracing the fraudulent ink. They forged your archival authentication signature to bypass the secondary trust restrictions. They used the specific $150,000 to cover the immediate down payment on a private luxury day cruiser yacht standing solely under Madison's corporate name. The revelation hit my chest like an icy weight, but it left no room for grief or panic. Anger wasn't loud. This time it was an audit. The money they had systematically stolen was not excess capital to be tossed around like confetti. It was the sacred fund I had preserved to establish a permanent historical preservation scholarship in my late husband's honor. They had taken the memory of the man who built our family and traded it for a fiberglass status symbol to showcase to their hollow, status-obsessed social circle. This was no longer a civil dispute over a mortgage guarantee or an ungrateful child throwing a tantrum. This was a documented felony. By choosing to skin me alive, they had crossed from personal betrayal into explicit criminal fraud. "This is no longer a civil matter, Laura," Arthur said quietly, closing the folder with a definitive snap. "This is identity forgery and grand theft. They have left themselves with absolutely zero paths to redemption. If we hand this audit to the district attorney, it triggers an immediate criminal investigation." I looked at the forged document, seeing the final, structural rot of the tower they had built on my back. They were completely unbothered by the damage they caused, as long as it funded their curated performance. I looked up at Arthur and gave a single, clinical nod. "Send it to the authorities," I said. This wasn't revenge. It was just the balance sheet, reaching its final, undeniable accounting. The 30-day deadline passed with the clinical weight of an incoming tide. The commercial lender did not hesitate. The formal foreclosure notice was legally pinned to the glass doors of that $6 million Marina District duplex loft, turning their private financial ruin into a public spectacle. Tyler's venture capital fund completely imploded within days as his primary anchor investors pulled their liquidity to avoid the looming shadow of a grand theft and forgery investigation. His luxurious lease on the Porsche was terminated, his unearned status systematically stripped away. Then came the heavy, desperate pounding against the solid oak door of my private archival studio on a freezing, grey winter afternoon. I did not open it wide. I engaged the heavy brass security chain, leaving only a narrow, absolute gap between my sanctuary and their panic. Tyler stood on the concrete landing, his tailored coat wrinkled, his hair dishevelled by the biting bay wind, his eyes wild and bloodshot. Madison stood right behind him, completely stripped of her pristine fashion director armour, her face pale and her lips trembling under smeared makeup. "Mom, please, you have to stop this insanity!" Tyler wept, his hands pressing frantically against the wood, his voice cracking with the desperation of a child who had finally discovered gravity. "The bank has taken possession of the loft. They escorted us out this morning. Madison has been suspended from her firm. We are completely ruined, Mom. We have nowhere to go. Please, just sign the secondary bridge reinstatement loan. I am your son. You can't do this to your own family over a lapse in judgment." I looked at him through the narrow opening, my expression entirely frozen, the calming scent of old paper and dried lavender surrounding me like a protective, unyielding fortress. I reached into my trench coat pocket, pulled out the certified copy of the forensic signature forgery audit, and slid the white pages through the gap into his trembling fingers. "You stopped being my family the exact moment you forged my name to steal $150,000 from your late father's restricted family trust account," I said, my voice slicing through the winter chill like polished glass. Madison let out a sharp, primal gasp, covering her face, as Tyler stared down at the undeniable evidence of his felony. I calmly disengaged his hands from the doorframe, turned the deadbolt, and clicked the lock shut permanently, sealing them out in the freezing rain. They had built their entire identity on an absolute illusion, an unearned projection of power that existed entirely within a rented shell funded by my marrow. They believed having luxury objects made them important, forgetting that status without internal character is just a bankruptcy waiting to happen. As the financial structure dissolved under the weight of its own corruption, their artificial authority vanished, proving they were nothing more than fragile parasites hoarsely screaming into a vacuum when the host finally cut the supply. Everything stayed silent for days, but in my head, a profound sense of peace finally took root. I liquidated my remaining urban assets, packed my meticulous preservation tools, and purchased a small, weathered stone cottage perched on the rugged cliffs of the Oregon coast. The space was filled with the rhythmic, heavy thunder of the Pacific waves crashing against the rocks, an honest, uncurated sound that washed away the lingering debris of their greed. I spent my quiet mornings planting white hydrangeas in the dark coastal soil and volunteering at the village library, teaching young children the quiet dignity of history. Tyler and Madison vanished into the grey background of financial court hearings and probation registries, forced to learn the hard value of $1 because they had to earn it through their own sweat, not my sacrifice. Sitting by my fireplace today, watching the firelight dance across my books, I have come to realize that dignity is the most expensive asset you will ever own. It requires a price that most people are completely terrified to pay. It costs you the comfortable dependency of a lie. It costs you the validation of a toxic circle. And sometimes it costs you the relationship with the very people you bled yourself dry to raise. What people often misunderstand is that unconditional maternal giving is not an act of love. It is an active mechanism of emotional self-harm. When you consistently shield a child from reality, when you line your own worn-out boots with cardboard so they can wear designer sneakers, you are not building their future, you are engineering the exact monster that will eventually turn around to skin you alive. The truth is, the moment someone decides to view your kindness as a transactional asset, the extraction must immediately stop. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free. But forgiveness does not require you to remain a compliant doormat at the threshold of their vanity. If you find yourself in a similar situation, buried under the guilt of a toxic family bond, remember that cutting an abusive tie is not a betrayal, it is the ultimate reclamation of your sovereign right to exist. Stop asking for permission to be seen from people who only value you when they need to drain your resources. Grant that validation to yourself. Turn the master key on your boundaries and understand that sometimes the most profound act of love is to simply close the door, step into the stillness, and begin writing the beautiful story of your own future. If this story resonated with your own journey of setting boundaries, hit that share button, drop a comment with your thoughts below, and join our community of sovereign hearts. Stay strong and protect your peace.